Hey friends, welcome back to our midweek moment. Pastor Nicole here, so glad you joined us. Well, this week we continued on in our sermon series called Sabbath 101, How to Create Sacred Space. And we talked about the importance of, on Sabbath, making sure that we put God over ourselves. So I've been thinking a lot, obviously, about Sabbath the last few weeks. Maybe you have as well. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of clarify is, what is the difference between a day off and Sabbath? Sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking that a day off is Sabbath, but I think there are some differences that are really key in order for us to have that full refreshment that we get when we truly Sabbath. So the big thing that I would say is a difference is really making space to connect with God. Now, you can connect with God any day, anytime, and I hope you do that regularly, daily, to have a moment to pray, read scripture, do all of those things that we talked about in the sermon on Sunday. But in particular on the Sabbath, I think it's important to set aside maybe more time than you would normally spend on that, or maybe a different, participating in a different spiritual discipline than you normally participate in. I think that it has to have some kind of distinction on the Sabbath. It's so important. And that's why we talked about putting God over ourselves, is that we make sure that we put God first on the Sabbath, that we really make sure that we spend that time connecting with God, making sure our souls have been refreshed. Our bodies need refreshed, absolutely. And that can come from a day off, certainly comes on Sabbath as well, but it's really that spiritual refreshment that we are looking for on Sabbath. So I've talked about how Sabbath needs two things: to do things that you enjoy and to make sure you're connecting with God. And so that's the importance of putting God over ourselves. One of the things I really appreciate about the Orthodox Jewish faith and how they practice Sabbath, because if you're familiar with the Orthodox faith, Orthodox Jewish faith, they're very particular on what they can and can't do on Sabbath. And so there's a lot of preparation that has to go into getting ready for the Sabbath. So they have to make sure that their food has been cooked for the next day. They have to make sure, or for later that evening even, they have to make sure that their light switches are on timers and that they put away all of their technology, and that if they need to go somewhere to run an errand, that they do that before Sabbath because they can't drive on Sabbath. So there's a lot that goes into kind of the preparing for Sabbath that I think is so interesting and could be so helpful in our practicing of Sabbath, to take that time to think through, okay, so I'm going to Sabbath tomorrow. So in order to Sabbath, I need to make sure that I get this, this, and this done so that I'm not tempted to do it on the Sabbath, or I'm not thinking about doing it on the Sabbath, or whatever that might be. Taking some time to prepare our hearts and our minds and our bodies for Sabbath can be so beneficial and so helpful in our practice of Sabbath. And so while I personally don't need to go to the lengths that maybe some other people do when they Sabbath, I do think that taking some time to really think about and prepare for what Sabbath is going to look like can be really helpful. And I think that's a big way that it can differ from just being a day off, right? Like when we have a day off, we're thinking like, well, I'm not going to work. I might still check email. I might, get some things done around the house that need to get done. I might pop over to the church to do one quick thing. You know what I mean? There's a difference between a day off and really guarding that Sabbath day and kind of putting up some boundaries around it to say, because I'm Sabbathing today, I'm not going to do these things. So if I'm not going to do these things, what do I need to prepare now so that I can Sabbath, or what do I need to push to do after Sabbath? So I want to encourage you to kind of think about what are those things in your life that you can do to prepare for Sabbath, to really get into that mindset of, oh, right, Sabbath is not just a normal day. It's not just a day off. It's not just the weekend. It's a holy and set apart day. And I treat it like that because I have done this work to prepare for it, or I have done, this work of connecting with God on the Sabbath, or whatever that might be. So I just want to invite you to think about that. And I'd also just throw in that another difference between a day off and Sabbath is that Sabbath is supposed to happen in that rhythm. We kind of talked about that the first week, that there's 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And so when we can keep our Sabbath on the same day and kind of work that rhythm, that holy rhythm into our lives, it is so beneficial for us. Now, I know that's not a reality for everybody. People work all different sorts of jobs, and some people don't have the luxury of having the same space for Sabbath every week, and that's okay. But if you can work that into your schedule, I think it's hugely beneficial to kind of get into that holy rhythm of 6 days of working, 1 day off. So just some thoughts today on how we might Sabbath and how that looks different than a day off, and really how we are making sure to put God over ourselves in Sabbath. That's a huge part of Sabbath. We're not just taking a day off. We're really focusing on putting God first and over ourselves on the Sabbath. So I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope you get some time to practice Sabbath this week. Join us this weekend. We're going to be continuing in our series, and we're going to be talking about how relationships and Sabbath work together. And so we want you to join us for that, whether in person or online. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see y'all later. Bye.